Hello, all, and welcome to the next episode of Unapologetic podcast by SilverJay. This podcast aims to controversially rebel and collectively fight for women, and specifically women of color, to be heard and understood. Today, I'm here with Celine Apollon, an incredible individual who is a Haitian-American Pan-African feminist, filmmaker, and researcher born and raised in Atlanta. She's been living in Congo Brazzaville broadly for the past 3 years, focused on researching creative and decolonial ways to support African survivors of gender-based violence and caregivers. She also continues to advance her work, directing her documentary, which highlights the beauty, complexity, and importance of healing from violence. She hopes to combine her research and filmmaking to mobilize funds and leaders to improve the ecosystem of support available for survivors across sub-Saharan Africa. And as Black and brown feminists, we thought it was super important to come together to demonstrate how we are each other's liberation. And what we discussed, and when we did have a really nice chat, is we've seen a lot of division between our communities, and we've both been privy to it. And we can't actually shy away from the topic and how we essentially need to utilize our colonial histories to understand, explain, and collaborate to essentially tackle our common enemy. So, Celine, why don't you take the floor and tell me a little bit about yourself in a bit more detail and, why you're here today?
Thank you so much. This is so wonderful to continue this conversation. Yeah, I agreed. It was super lovely chatting that one night in London, and now we're doing this. This is really exciting. Yeah, so I've been in Congo for 3 years about in total, and I fell in love with the country. Again, it's weird because I'm Haitian, so everyone's always like, why Congo? But I always say Congo chose me. It reminded me a lot of my history and ancestors, and always being really inspired by Black women that I was around. And I feel like I just developed a calling really to support the women's movements here, and also support really how to create infrastructures that allow survivors to heal and thrive, whether that's through creating safe spaces or through working with the governments to figure out what does the actual data look like and how to collect data in a safe and non-exploitive way. So yeah, that's kind of where I've landed and where I'm at right now. Again, I'm in the process of finishing my documentary, which is really in line with funding, which I know we'll talk about later in terms of
For sure.
who has the power in terms of that. But yeah, thank you so much again, and yeah, excited to continue chatting.
Yeah, no, so exciting. And I think all the stuff that you do is it's not mainstream. We don't talk about this stuff. And I think a part of what I'm trying to do in this platform is to ensure that all the things that we talk about become mainstream activist topics, because we are so centered by surface level societal pressures and issues. And actually, there is so much more behind what goes on with what you're even doing that really need to be shown. And I think this is like a perfect opportunity. So yeah, I'm super excited. I think what I wanted to do for our audience is to start with the basics that we know, and actually how we can use some of these tools to explain why women of color feel a type of way. And we talk about women of color being angry people. There's a reason why we feel that anger. And I think Intersectionality by Kimberly Crenshaw really explains that feeling for us. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard intersectionality as a big feminist buzzword. It's come out here, there, and everywhere. It tends to be with like quite little depth. So we wanted to personally break that down and explain what that means, and how it's about liberating women of color from the burden of trying to constantly explain their injustice. So, Celine, why don't you tell me what you think intersectionality is, and we can just get into it.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think for me, I always like to talk from a context of my personal experiences, because that's what I know the best. For me, I think it's one, growing up, I was super insecure about my body, but it was for two reasons. One, because I was a woman, and I felt like, a lot of times there were guys looking at me, whatever, especially like going to the pool, and it was just weird. And then two, like my body wasn't a white girl's body. Like I had curves, and my hair was an afro and like I had braids, and that just was a double whammy, as they call it. So like I just was really, I feel like that in a way for me sums it up as in two levels and layers of thinking, two levels of honestly feeling uncomfortable because I wasn't
Mm.
the societal norm or didn't fit the white standards. So for me, I think it's looking at a lot of the ways that society has been built and looking at it not through just one gender lens, for example, or even one racial lens, but combined.
Yeah, I think that is a really lovely way of describing it and putting it. And I think she came up with the term in 1989, and I feel like now people are starting to understand what it generally means for them. And just to break it down even further for the audience, when we talk about intersectionality, we're talking about how we have different forms of oppression. So we can look at it, as Celine was saying, you've got racism, you've got sexism, but then you've also got another load of categories that are working independently, but also they overlap at the same time. So when I talk about being a woman of color, there is so much more to that than meets the eye, really. It's like if you were to, and then I think one of the main examples is in a court of law, if you're trying to explain the oppression that has hit you, let's say you want to hold someone accountable, if you feel like you've been unfairly discriminated against. And the example that a lot of, people use is if there was a white woman in the workplace and a black man in the workplace, and the white woman was told, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to work here, and it would be obvious it's because she's a woman. Whereas if a black man said, "Oh, I wasn't allowed to work here," it'd be obvious it's because of race. It's because he's black. So when you've got a woman of color in a workplace and you say, "I've been unfairly discriminated against," society makes you choose what system of oppression it is that you have been a victim of. And what Kimberly Crenshaw has very cleverly done, she's basically said there's no specific system of oppression or specific category because it's an overlap. You cannot choose between one or the other. They all coexist together. And I think when I learned that, it finally freed me from what burden I was personally carrying and how to explain certain things to certain people. And it's been a great tool actually to be able to use when I've been explaining what I'm doing and why I do what I do. So a lot of people do use it as an actual tool rather than like just a general theory for feminism. So actually one question, Celine, that I had for you is, so how do you use intersectionality in the work that you do? And is it something that you do in practice? I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so a lot of my work, like I mentioned, is looking at healing. So what that looks like and how it isn't a one size fits all, and also how it's not, it's a journey. It's a journey, in fact, and it's not linear. And so I think even for me, it's been a challenge because for me, healing looks like one certain way. And I'm like, okay, to take myself out of the equation and really make it open. So allowing survivors and the woman I'm speaking with to really explore and figure out what's best for them. So I think in that way, it's liberating because you can figure out who you are without having these hats that you have to put on, or also, fitting into one box. I think even, for example, like shelters, I think everyone always thinks that, okay, shelters are the best way for a safe space that would work for across the world. Whereas in Botswana, for example, when I was doing this workshop and just really brainstorming, like what actually is a safe space for Botswana women, they were like, I hate shelters. Like, I don't want to go into a place that's dark. Like, I grew up, my ancestors grew up going to the village and having tea underneath a tree, and that was healing. And that was where I found my identity, and that's where my roots are. And I feel like that in a way is also for me what intersectionality is about is looking at your roots and also not being ashamed of it. And so I think overall that's where I've constantly had to return to. And also it's challenging because I think it's easy to just be like, okay, this is gonna work. And this is clearly what the findings are. This is clearly how how it's best to support survivors, but it's really not that at all. There's a researcher, Laura Cinco, she's amazing. She created this gender-based violence healing tool, which basically, obviously, there's very broad sections, but at different levels or different stages. For example, there's a stage of denial, so you aren't ready to face or recognize your trauma that you experienced. And there's another state where you've reached a level of recognition and you're starting to take the steps to care for yourself. And usually that is a moment where you're able to actually start caring for yourself in a suitable manner. And then there's other states where you have amazing self-esteem. And if anything, for me, I always view that stage as actually better than where you were before because you don't see your trauma as negative. You see it as a way that's shaped you. And honestly, that in a way may have helped you become even stronger. And so I don't know if that answers your question,
You
but I feel
did.
like for me, I feel like it's accepting, but also rejoicing that you survived something. In the sense of gender-based
Wow.
violence, for me, that's what it is. Yeah. And it's funny because actually this past week I was talking with a research assistant on a project, and she was really unsure about whether or not we should combine including victims versus survivors. And she was also confused. I was confused about the difference between that terminology. And I actually think that it has to do with what the person believes they are.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it's not necessarily, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a negative or a positive thing. I think it's just how you view yourself. And for me, for a while, I was stuck in this victim mentality. Um, Whereas now I feel like I've left that and I feel like I've entered a survivor mentality. Um, so anyways, it's a
No,
bit
I
of
love that.
healing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's going to be really beneficial for a lot of women to hear, even if it's just a snippet of information of what's actually happening globally. Because obviously there'd be, if we have, gender-based violence in the UK, for example, it's going to be, as we know, it's going to be very specific towards a group of women compared to like a global understanding of how other people will be able to channel it differently. So, no, it's super important. And actually, it leads on quite nicely into when we discuss like differences between women and different communities and how we're supposed to actually work together to decolonize. I actually want to start looking at, Black and brown histories and where we have some similarities, but also why it's important to differentiate between them. How do we let the communities do that? And we need to sort of unpack the hostility between the communities and why that is. I know we're jumping from gender-based violence all the way back down to community and activism, but I think that is where we're sort of heading with this. And just a little bit of background for me, Black feminist literature has really opened my eyes completely. And I've seen such a shift in the way I now view South Asian feminism. That literature has changed my life because I'm able to take snippets from it and apply it to my community in its own way. And it was when I read parts of Sojourner Truth's text, Ain't I a Woman? I think she did it as a speech in the 1800s. And she says, I have to do the manual labor. I have to do the hard, horrible jobs. And, her white counterparts are seen as super dainty. And she saw this huge difference between what a woman means if you're a white woman versus if you're a black woman. And she basically called that out. And I always feel like that's the beginning of intersectionality. She's the one who called it out originally. And I always applied that to South Asian women when they get married and they were just forced to be maids, or if you're going to put it in a really extreme sense, it was just forced labor really for a lot of brown women in these marriages. And we normalize domestic violence a lot. So, and that's just like how it is really in our community. And we talk about things, again, as I mentioned, at a very surface level. So we talk about marriage a lot, but we don't actually say what it is. And it really is like normalized domestic violence. And I think, yeah, the Black feminist literature really helped me unpack that. And I remember you mentioning that you were in Sri Lanka and you went to some of the tea plantations. So I wanted an answer to maybe what I've just said, but also just like direct experience and what you've seen.
Yeah, so that was honestly, like I think because I was in Ghana a couple of years ago and I visited the slave castles, and I think that it's funny because visiting these tea plantations was more eye-opening, intense, and emotional for me than visiting the slave castles because I obviously, in a way, ignorantly, I was less aware of that history of the history that's still happening, unfortunately. And I went to the plantation, and most of them are still foreign owned. Most of the people who work on these plantations are women, elderly Tamil women who are still to this day discriminated against, still do not have rights to purchase the land or have any access to the land, really. And they're, I mean, of course, they're paid awfully. And there is a bit of gender-based violence that occurs between the owners and the workers. And so I think that was just crazy for me because I've never really witnessed and seen modern day slavery. Honestly, that's really what it felt like for me. And I think honestly, I think it's not radical to say that that's what's occurring. And I just was really appalled, but also in a way, it honestly made me really have more empathy and also frustration that there is this tension between Black and brown feminists. And I mean, in a way, it's like our histories are so connected. I mean, I mean, we all suffered for the same, basically, reasons. And um, it made me realize, okay, we need to really unite on this and also see each other, really learn the histories, and if we can try to do as much to experience them in a way so that we can have empathy moving forward. Yeah. So that was really difficult. But also I felt really grateful to have that experience.
Yeah. How
And
come
now
you
I
were
feel
there?
like I have more. Why was I there?
Yeah, and how did you manage to
Yeah.
see it? Is it legal to see it? Like,
So I was there actually for a research symposium and it was for civil rights. So ironically. And they were like, okay, we're gonna take you out to this tea plantation. And we kind of were all like, what? Like, why are you taking us to tea plantation? And they were like, don't worry, it's fine. We've done the research, it's ethical. And I was like, this sounds so wrong. But I mean, it was really weird too because it's the most beautiful landscapes ever. It was incredible. I mean, the country of Sri Lanka is completely beautiful, but you're watching and you're just like, I mean, you're literally looking at slavery occur in this beautiful landscape. It's just really weird. I had so many conflicting emotions. And yeah, so the reasoning behind after we left the plantation, they basically said, we wanted to show you what is really happening here. Like we didn't want to give you too much pretext. We wanted you to, I guess, come to this realization on your own. But it was also complicated because the US state funded trip and the US State Department funded trip, and we weren't allowed to talk about because of everything going on in the US, we weren't allowed to state our opinion on the record. So we were just very censored as to what we could talk about too. But that's another subject.
oh my
Yeah,
God. Whoa. Okay.
yeah,
So that's how it all, and that's how you were able to go and see it. It was like it was state funded, but almost like they were using the state funding to demonstrate what was happening. But then you were censored, you couldn't say
yeah,
anything.
exactly. So
That
it
is
just
just
felt
crazy.
exactly.
Whoa. Okay. It's so beyond the day to day and the norm from what most people are used to, especially in the West with corporate careers, maybe dabbling in some creativity from time to time. I'm not sure what everyone else does, but that is sort of the bubble I'm around. So to be on the ground and to see it on a grassroots level is totally different. I was obviously I did this for my degree a bit, but I just started researching it again, and we use the terms like imperial feminism. And when we look at colonization back in the day, essentially they exploited the people in order to create a better society in the global north. So the global north is essentially the west, and the global south is the east. And what the global north did, and what the British tended to do with other empires working sort of they coexisted at the same time, was they forced manual labor, and they were able to do it in a way that it was justified. So the way they were able to go in and exploit the global south was through a lot of justifications that they were lesser, and it was like, we're doing this for, their benefit, and a lot of that is still in practice today. And a big line of how they were able to justify colonization was through the angle of liberating women. So it was, they would say, we need to go and save, South Asian women from the South Asian men. This is why we are interfering in their cultures and their lives. But essentially, it was all for capitalist gain. And they would use, for example, with South Asian culture and Indian culture, we have like a practice, a very outdated, obviously like bad practice of burning widows if their husband dies, and it's called sukbi. The British use that as a justification to go and colonize, because they're saying, oh my God, I can't believe they do this to women. But in reality, they never cared about women. They were using it as an excuse. And I feel like we still do that today and in the now, and your work is obviously, it showcases that they are doing that, but it's reproduced in such clever ways, language wise. It's the savior complex, it's the white savior complex. And I think if we understood as women of color, like feminists that are fighting for the same cause, it needs to be from a non-savior complex. But actually, I know we complain about it, but how do we not have that complex? That's actually quite challenging when you're in a position of privilege.
Yeah.
Another really hard one. I'm sorry.
I struggled with this a lot when I first moved here. Um, because I think I was focused so much on not doing exactly that. I guess to put in perspective, I was very much living in the village with only Congolese people. It took me 6 months to see a white person, and they called me La Blanche, like they called me white girl. So like I
Oh, did
was
they?
like, yeah, so I was pretty much, I was trying so hard not to live to that stereotype, complaining, asking for, extra support or something, being um, yeah, or like giving my money away to everyone, but also I didn't want to be stingy. It just felt like I was constantly like I was trying to figure my placing out. And I think in that process, though, I was so focused on not being white savior that I ended up actually losing myself a bit and losing my own, recognizing the fact that, okay, yeah, I did grow up in a Western society. Like there are boundaries that I have. Like, I'm sorry, sometimes I need Wi-Fi to call my family who's not here. I think there's standards that are completely okay to have. And so I think once you know like your boundaries, and also like recognize that, okay, yes, we grow up into this society and we're not the same. And I think you have a level of respect for yourself and also other people that is really important. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think it's really important because I went through the same thing, and you know what, I still go through it. My friends call me out. I really try not to have it, but it was, I'm really passionate about sexual exploitation and how, yeah, just sex work in general. And it was funny, I was traveling in Rome with my friend a couple of years ago, and we went into a brothel, and I wanted to go and see. I thought it was a strip club, but it was sort of like a strip club slash brothel. I was sort of doing like my own mini sociological experiment on a Wednesday night in Rome. And I went in, and I started speaking to one of the sex workers there. And I ended up just being a bit too much like, I felt like a white savior. I don't know what I was talking about. And it was like, I didn't know whether I should be talking to her normally. Does she want to chat to me? Like, should I give her money? Should I not? Like, why am I in here? Is this unethical to even be witnessing anything? Because it's sort of like the women aren't getting the profit, it's the people who own the place. And I was so, yeah, you actually don't know what the right thing to do is, because it's even like with anthropology, like, is it unethical to go and sit and
Right.
watch a culture and document it? And it's exactly the same with any sort of charity, really, or any interest, because at the end of the day, you're viewing it as the colonizer, whether I like it or not. Like, I am British Indian, and if I want to claim being from Britain and be British, then I have to take the history with me as a British person. So I'm stuck as well in this really weird dichotomy. But I guess if we overthink it, we're never going to do any good work either. So it's like, what's the balance? But if there are white women listening, what advice would you give them when it comes to the white savior complex?
Remember that the work, and this just came to me. Remember that the work is work. I think that's what I struggle with, and I think because for me, I'm super passionate about it. I have a personal connection to the work, but also at the end of the day, like we can't save these people. Like, I mean, we just can't. We're not God, if you believe in God or not. And I'm one person. And even I had one person, a friend tell me one time, I don't want to save the world, I just want to save one person. And I just felt like even that maybe impacts, maybe have a great conversation. Like, I think we just need to bring it down a bit. And I think like also like remind ourselves like this is work, and to remind yourself that why you're doing it, and make sure that you're not putting yourself too into it. Your value doesn't come from saving this person or even helping them. Your value comes from just being a good person and kind
Mm.
and loving. Yeah.
Okay, I like that. I think that's a really good way to approach any situation where you feel like you're working in human rights or the activist spaces or whatever you're doing. So the other area that I think is super interesting is the term Orientalism. So obviously we discussed it a little bit, where it's we see people of color as, or colonized people as, exotic or slash inferior, and it's shaped how we also see Black and South Asian identities. Uh, I think we discussed this, and we both wrote this down, is how Orientalism has divided feminists of color, and it's led to a bit of jealousy and tension between Black and brown feminists. So, what's your take on that as well?
Um, I think firstly, my take is that it's sad that there is that jealousy and tension that exists. It's really upsetting, because it's a result of this oppression and of histories of us just being completely colonized, taken advantage of, whatever you want to say, put in a word. And I think that makes me sad that it's divided. I mean, amazing women, people who are doing amazing work, who are just loving people. It's also complicated because there is this level of colorism that definitely exists. A sense of, for example, your shade of brown or your shade of black, um, and how that really shapes how you're seen. I mean, even in Africa, it's super common for years, women have been using the lightening cream, to try to become lighter skinned. There were many times when I just felt guilty for being lighter skinned compared to other Black friends. And even in the feminist world, when I'm working in Pan-African feminist workplaces, there are times when there have been things that have been said that have made me feel guilty, honestly.
Like what?
And I won't say name, obviously I can't, but there was a
Okay.
time I just was started doing this work with a new organization, and during the interview, the woman was just kind of like, "Yeah, I just never understood, you see these light-skinned Black feminists, and I just don't get it. Like, I just always was never understood why they're the ones that are leading the work. And I just felt like this makes me feel like I shouldn't be trying to do this work anymore. Like I'm not the right person. Yeah, and we're talking about like theoretical consciousness and how that plays a role, like your histories and how you think plays a role in your own idea of feminism. And I was just like, well, this is very ironic because I feel like she was honest though one moment that she's was always jealous of the skinny, light-skinned girls in school and how she had to work through that. Um, but still, like it was clear that that insecurity was a divider. Like that's creating that tension still. And I just was
Mm,
like, okay, let me just have grace for myself and for her and not take this to heart. But I think it was still really hard because I just felt like it was a dagger. I was like, nope, okay, nope, let's just take a seat, honestly. And that's
yeah,
so
totally.
sad because who are the ones that are taking the seats though? Like, I mean, who are the ones that won't hesitate? I feel like honestly, it's white women and it's white men. It's often, honestly, sometimes black men like taking these seats and not even thinking twice. Whereas we're
Mm.
here and jeopardizing ourselves almost. And it's again, I go back to what I said in the beginning. It's just sad.
Yeah, it's
Um,
sad. That is such a shame. And I think colorism for us in our community is also terrible to a point where even when we talk about marriage, like people will use the term kala, which means black, and they'll say they are too kala. So they'll say they are too black for you to get married to. And obviously the anti-blackness in our community is definitely rooted in that colonial history where the darker you were, it meant that you were outside doing the manual labor, and there's a lot of stigma associated with it. And it meant that you were outside a lot more. And again, it had that legacy. And even now, so I think that's why we see a lot of anti-blackness in our community, and then even between each other. Like, um, I think I went to, obviously this is not the same example because you work like and you do some amazing stuff, whereas I just have like Western examples constantly, but I've got another one. So I was getting my foundation shade tested. So this is totally different to the stuff that you do. And
honestly, this is so relatable already though.
I was getting it tested, and I was a bit tan, so I was slightly darker, and I had this South Asian woman. I don't know where she was from. She might have been Indian or Pakistani. Like, usually I've got a really good sense, but I actually couldn't tell here. And she just gets this super dark shade out, and she starts putting it on my skin quite like I wouldn't want to say like aggressively, but it felt very like I was a bit taken aback because it wasn't like, let me show you on my hands and I'll just put it on your face. It was like she was sort of like painting it on. And I went, whoa, whoa. And I said, look, I think this is a little bit, this isn't my skin tone. Like, this isn't right. And she goes, oh, sorry. And I was like, and she was sort of my color. So I don't know whether there was some projection there that she was facing. And it wouldn't even matter if it doesn't matter what skin color I am. And, if she chose my shade correctly, that's fine. But she purposefully didn't. And then I remember walking around the rest of the foundation store with a bit of a complex, like, and I was a bit taken aback by the whole experience. And I projected onto somebody else then. And I spoke to this woman, and she was a lot lighter than me, but again, she was definitely South Asian. I think she actually was Pakistani. And I just said, oh, this is really bad of me, by the way. So, like, whatever, I'm obviously taking accountability for what I'm about to say. But I just said to her, like, oh, you're fair. Like, what shade am I? She was so taken aback. And I was taken aback by everything I just said. And I think it was all that trauma that I don't know whether you carry, inside of you anyway, that you're constantly fighting against. I can't believe I just said that on a podcast, but like here we are being honest. Um, you know, just
I
happened.
mean, yeah, it's even at the level of like, it's funny because I had a similar experience. My best friend, one of my best friends, she's like my sister. We grew up together. She's Gujarati, and she has like she's just amazing with makeup. And because I really don't like makeup, and I just like being more natural. But she is, I feel like, a genius in the fact that she uses makeup and it makes it her look so natural, and she can just do that with also anyone else. And so I come back to the US a couple, I guess 2 years ago, and the first thing I was like, can we go to Sephora? Like I want to try this out, but I only trust you. And imagine like 3 months before that, this is weird, but I somehow got into this random Congolese photo shoot. I looked in the mirror after I got makeup on, and it was this Congolese guy who did my makeup. I felt like I looked like a clown. Like I hate to say this, but I looked awful. The shade was so
Mm,
bad. It was just not me. And then, fast forward, and I'm getting my shade matched. Simi is her name. I guess I'm leaking her identity, but she was like, just pick this. 2 seconds. And she was like, yeah,
wow.
that's it. And I put it on. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, it was my shade. She knew my
Yeah.
shade more than a Congolese woman knew shade or a Congolese man. And I just was like, and someone who was, if you trace the history, I have more connection with Congolese people than I do with South Asian people or Gujarati people. And so it just was like, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so interesting because we're talking about our communities in general being having hostility, but actually between each other and we're constantly projecting. It's like I even projected back onto somebody else, and like that is just it's awful. And I think it's that self-awareness piece of what we need to keep hammering in. And I think around the time of the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of Indians and Pakistanis in particular sort of came out and said we need to start calling out the anti-blackness in our communities and really start to challenge that. And that was the first time I had seen a bit of development like quite proactively. And even now, when I speak to some of my older family members, I'm seeing a really positive shift actually. So it is starting to change, but it's you got to keep hammering it in basically. And I think when we're nicer to each other and we're kinder, I just think then we'll be kinder to people who are also not our race and not our ethnicity. And especially between our communities, we definitely need that. I think if we joined forces quite a bit more strongly, it would be we'd be unstoppable. It'd be amazing. And it's really hard to pinpoint all of the different interdependent discrimination sort of working at once. Because you've got your immigration status, then you've got the color of your skin, then you've got your class, and all of it, as we said, works. You create your one individual then, and then they've got their own lived experience. So anyone, whoever explains their lived experience, if we can relate to one part of it, that that solves a part of our trauma and a part of what we go through, and also then what other people go through that we can work with. So we've discussed community hostility. Is there anything you wanted to add on that, by the way, before I start jumping topics?
I just wanted to highlight that I did see recently when we first met in London, that same week I had the chance to meet with the Oya Consortium, which is kind of like a coalition of Black and brown shelters, or as in, let me back up, shelters that are specifically for Black and brown women in London. And I was just blown away. They kind of presented their work, and I think it brought tears to my eyes to see leaders, like Black and brown leaders of women's shelters, come together and share the stage, and also be so well united and rooted in their communities. It just was really amazing, and it gave me a lot of hope that it is possible, and that it already is starting.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
How did you end up going? Was it something that you'd seen, or was it with work?
Yeah, so I was invited to this conference with it's called the Change Network. It's a city hub for gender equity, and also it was in partnership with the Mayor of London. And the second day we did a site visit to this center that was in Hackney. I think we're all recognizing that they were all applying to the same funding.
Okay.
And that they have the same needs, and so they decided, okay, let's just join forces and create one organization. Like we'll operate separately. And what's really beautiful is they have within each shelter, for example, there's a South Asian shelter, and they have specific people who can speak different languages that they need. So, Gujarati and yeah, and Tamil and yeah. And it's very much catered to what the needs of their communities, but they also join solidarity in the financing and so that it's equally shared and they meet, I think, monthly just to kind of catch up and see where the gaps are and how they can apply to the same grants under one name versus competing for one another.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's amazing. Well, that's exactly what we're saying, isn't it? It's the joint solidarity and actually creating that. I was researching and there was like a group called the Southall Black Sisters, and that they came in the 1970s, and even the Organization of Women of African and Asian Descent. So there have been moments where we've seen groups coming together because they realize we have a common goal. This term came out, it was political blackness. And basically, it describes it here as an umbrella identity centering anti-racism and colonial legacy over ethnic or religious differences as a way to build solidarity. And I think that's amazing because that's essentially what we're trying to do on this podcast right now is create that unity based on the shared history rather than our ethnic and religious differences. So there are terms for it and it is there. But the problem is, and then I think what we've all realized is that there then ends up being a cultural differences and tension because we've got different priorities, and it's about how we align on those priorities. But I think what I've noticed, and I've recently just started working with a youth charity, is a lot of it is all down to funding anyway. So if you're trying to prioritize, it is to do with funding. So again, you're going to have different communities having wants and needs differently, and sacrificing yourself and your needs for another community is always going to be like a hard task. But have you experienced the work that you do as well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that really hits home because basically we had received funding for the documentary we were working on, and
Yeah.
we decided last minute, or not really last minute, when USAID and all these other funders, global funders, were cutting their funding, especially for um, preventing sexual violence across sub-Saharan Africa. We decided last minute, okay, let's just give these funds away to shelters on the continent who are already doing this work. And that was a really hard decision because I mean, obviously my heart is in this work and in this documentary and this film, but also as like after like volunteering at the shelter for 6 weeks, I was like, I mean, there are women dying because of this.
Yeah.
Like, I think when it comes to that level of how high and intense these circumstances are, which is really sad this that it has to get to that level. But I was like, okay, it's kind of a no-brainer. But yeah, we are talking about how you make the decision and also whose needs to put first. It's hard because also everyone's needs matter, like hard is hard. Um, so it's again, I think it goes back to even that balance we were talking about. But yeah, I don't really have an answer to the question. I just like, totally agree that it's really difficult.
Yeah, it's just hard. Like life is hard. I have a friend and she'll tell me like, like a bad story or something that's gone on. I'm just like, that is really hard. And you say that all the time. But there's actually sometimes that's just what it is. It's just difficult. And I think it's like, yeah, you can't prioritize one over another because you end up doing that thing of the categories of oppression again. So it's like whose needs matter. most,
Yeah.
and it you can't really decide that. It'd be unethical. But that's why I guess communities then concentrate on their own because it's an easy path. I think I was chatting to somebody who works in diversity and inclusion in the corporate sphere. At that time, I was interested in getting involved in D&I and in the corporate world, and then I transitioned anyway. I didn't end up in it. But she asked me, she said, like, oh, so what do you want to focus on? And I was like, what a weird question. I literally said, well, I want to focus on women, then I want to focus on like women of color, and then I was like, well, then I want to focus on ableism in the workplace, and then I also want to focus on like there's like a million things, and she goes, you know, you can just choose one, and I was like, well, I can't because it's, for me in my head, it's like if you're in a workplace, it has to be sort of all or nothing because we need equal access for everybody and we need equal opportunity for everybody. That's the whole point. I don't want to pigeonhole. I guess it doesn't work like that, does it? You have to choose. So again, it happens everywhere. And I think, don't know anybody listening who feels the same way when it comes to working in any industry and working with anything to do with equitable access. Like, how do you choose? It's really difficult. So the next area that I thought was interesting to discuss is like obviously we use the terms like South Asians have started using the term brown a bit more. So I use the term brown quite a lot. I find it quite an easy way to generalize for my community without needing to say South Asian or needing to say like Indian and then more specifically Gujarati, Punjabi, whatever, because we have some universal experiences. And I've always thought this, but I've never asked anybody this. And actually, then it came up in some of the research that I was doing. When we use the term black, obviously, we use that in the West quite often, but actually, it is a monolith. So you end up generalizing a massive group of people and universalizing their experience. So actually, what is your like general opinion on that? Should we start be thinking about our language differently?
Yeah, it's just so different. I mean, growing up in the US, and especially on top of that, growing up specifically in Atlanta, it's so ingrained in all aspects of our culture. Every conversation you have, everywhere you walk, it's just you feel it. And it's just a different world, honestly. And then moving to the continent, um, it felt very different. Like it wasn't like, oh, I'm black. That's my identity. It has to be my identity. It has to be who I am. I feel like it was more like, well, yeah, I'm black. I'm African. We're all obviously like they don't even really even use the phrase that much. And it's felt in a way weirdly liberating for me because
Mm,
I felt growing up, especially in Atlanta, you had to own and almost show off your blackness. And it honestly became very toxic in some levels. Like you have to talk a certain way and you have to dress a certain way in order to be black. And even growing up, funny enough, same with the same friend who's Gujarati, like she would say, yeah, I'm a coconut. Because she's like brown on the outside, white on the inside. And I would
yeah.
be like, yeah, and then I'd be like, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm an Oreo, but also like I really love Rihanna, but like I also like I loved Hillary Duff growing up. I also loved Alicia Keys. Like it's like I don't even know like who am I? Like can I just be
Yeah.
me? And it's not on a level of saying I don't see color, because that I find completely wrong and toxic, but it's more of can we just be ourselves? Like, are we still stuck in this mindset that we have in order to be with people, like you have to be black? Like, I find that really restricting and
Mm,
yeah, not at all emancipating from, what I think our ancestors would have wanted. I think they would have wanted us just to be free to exist and less, you know, fitting within some mold. That also a mold that to a certain degree was also created by white people. Like I think like when you see it, like I hate to say it, but I hate when men sag. Like, they pull their pants down a little bit. Like that, it's kind of phased out. I have always
yeah.
hated it. But I feel like there was a time when it was super in style. If you didn't do it, you weren't Black. And I just was like, okay, you're gonna fall down. Like it's just not even smart. And I just like I just was like, we need to stop. And then, it was also many white people who were perpetuating this negative image, like, oh, Black guys, they just sag, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, just like, guys, like, let's just kind of like move on. Like, it's one
Mm,
thing if you just, you want to be in the rap scene, which again is a whole other story, but it's like, can we just be ourselves? Like, put a
yeah,
bow on, get the right size of jeans. You don't even have to wear jeans, but just be you.
whatever. Yeah, whatever you want to be. Which is so funny you've like said all of this because actually one of the aims for the podcast, obviously it's called Unapologetic, but what I also felt and what I felt growing up was there was this level of what it meant to be brown. And it was, do I have to do things a certain way? Do I have to act a certain way? It's for us growing up as we were too white for Indians in India, but then too Indian for white people in the UK. So we were like stuck in this weird place. And a part of what I'm doing is pushing for individualism. It really is to like just be yourself. Like if you want to wear skinny jeans and like a cap, like go for it. It doesn't, and equally it's even for us, whatever we want to wear, we should be able to. And it's that level of individualism that needs to come from who we are, not just like the what we feel like we should be behaving like. It's almost we have to perform and be on. And in reality, it's we're all just living and existing and experiencing things in our own way. And however you want to dress, however you want to love, however you want to be, but equally, there has to be some accountability for collective activism, and we have to work together as a community. But why can't we work together whilst also just being ourselves? What is it? Why do I need to code switch? Like, I don't want to. I'm just going to be me.
Yeah. And that's exactly and that's kind of hit me when you said collective action because that's what should matter is the actions that we're doing, not, how we're portraying ourselves or what we
Yeah.
look like. Because literally that like what our appearance was the basis of how we were oppressed. So I just don't get like why we're stuck in this. Like why do we have to drive a fancy car necessarily? Or why do I have to have parades? Like it just doesn't matter,
Yeah,
honestly,
it
at the end
doesn't
of the day.
matter. I
Yeah.
totally agree. It's so true. That, what did you just say just there? How we looked was how we were discriminated against, but that's all we seem to care about at the moment is how we're perceived and how we look. And it's like, yeah, it's what we should be doing in our time, in our free time to make the world better and put wrongs to rights or whatever. I mean, that's really cringy, but it's true. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's super interesting. And especially your experience in the US, because I feel like obviously I have a lot of distance from it. I'd never see it, and I guess my audience is very much like it'd be UK, and like obviously being from Britain, it's totally different. Our relationship with empire in comparison to the US, because it was almost like the American Empire was born from the British Empire, but never really called that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've had your own history, but it's always been streamlined and funneled into just genuinely civil rights. But obviously, the magnitude of it was crazy. And obviously, people talk about Native Americans, but not so much. There's that erasure, I think, with some of the US history.
Yeah, I feel like that's the fact that it's taken 2020 for them to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day is so sad. And I think it's still Columbus Day in many calendars. And even I remember growing up, the way they portrayed Christopher Columbus, like he was like a god. And I'm just like, that is crazy that that's the manner that they were teaching our history to us. I honestly feel like to a certain degree, like I was brainwashed, taught wrongly. Like I really believed for a while, oh, he's probably a great guy. I mean, I was late. I mean, what else am I supposed to believe? I think for so long, like it was really weird because I was 16 when they had US history. That was what we had to learn, ironically. And I remember my best friend Raven, who's like a sister to me also, she's Black, and we just had so many repetitive moments of like, how do we not know that, about this, about civil rights? Like we're Black, we're supposed to know this. And I was like, girl, I have no idea where that came out of.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even know this. And it was a white woman teaching us. And honestly, what was also ironic was she was the best history teacher I ever had. And I had Black, brown history teachers. And it's just like, it's just so interesting that, yeah, we learned so much about civil rights movement from a white woman.
So it's like when we talk
Yeah.
about people that are ignorant and like obviously we blame the education system, that's fine. But actually, there is some personal responsibility. Like the amount of access to information we have these days is crazy. Like, my parents didn't
Yeah.
have that 30, 40 years ago. So there's some leeway there, really. So they would have had to go to a library, find a book, and then read one sentence in there. They weren't going to do that.
Yeah.
Like they were trying to, build a life for themselves. But we have so much access to information. I just don't think there's an excuse. I feel like TikTok has become like the really teeny tiny version of YouTube because my brother will get a lot of tips and tricks, but social media is a whole it's a whole thing. Um, so sort of bringing it back, actually, we've had some really interesting conversations. And to see and like to hear some of your examples of what you've been up to and what you're doing. And I think we even started like with the healing all the way up to now we're discussing like individualism versus like collective action and all these sorts of things that are personal experiences to us. It's a really fine line between understanding our privilege versus understanding that we're also discriminated against because we have economic privileges now that we didn't have before, and there's power in economic privilege. So it's it's a really challenging balance, to be honest. And I guess that comes with class privilege as well. But it's difficult to conceptualize sometimes and understand where you utilize that privilege versus not. I go back to my old school and I try and discuss intersectionality and post-colonial feminism at the school. And I talk about being comfortable by being uncomfortable in your privilege. So because we have certain privileges in the West, we shouldn't be ashamed of them. We should actually use them to a good advantage. I mean, that's exactly what you've gone and done. You've used your privilege in an amazing way. And what you're doing is so grassroots, but so open-minded. I've never really met anybody like you before, if I'm being honest, and it's amazing. Um, so it's about being self-aware, and it's that self-awareness piece, I guess, that comes into it, to be honest.
Not being, which is why I really love the title of your podcast, but not apologizing for who you are and not
Mm,
apologizing for the privilege either, and recognizing that it is a tool that can be used for the good of not just yourself and others.
yeah, for sure. I just want to say like a massive thank you for coming on. You've been amazing. I've learned so much from just having one conversation with you. I think it is clear we are each other's liberation, and I think that's something we need to take forward and um really, really go with. So yeah, just thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, this has really, really made my night. And it just was nice to have an open conversation about all these things.
And thanks for sharing everything. It's amazing. So yes, have a lovely evening and thanks everybody for listening.